For 15 long years, the unsolved murder of Grace Bridges was more than just a cold case file. It was an open wound in the collective heart of the small town of Dothan, Alabama. She was a beloved local furniture store owner, a familiar face, a grandmother, shot and left for dead in what appeared, on the surface, to be a tragically botched robbery. In the weeks and months that followed, the investigation that began with a flurry of activity slowed to a crawl. The leads, once promising, dried up like rivers in a drought. Hope for justice, once a burning flame, eventually faded to a barely glowing ember. The community, and more importantly her family, was left with nothing but painful questions and the chilling silence of an investigation gone cold. But what nobody could have known, what remained hidden within the aging pages of the case file, was that a single, almost imperceptible piece of overlooked evidence was lying in wait. It was a silent witness, a ghost from the past, holding the key to a truth so shocking it would one day blow the entire case wide open. This piece of the puzzle pointed not to a mysterious drifter or a hardened criminal, but to a killer who had been hiding in plain sight for over a decade, a specter walking among the very people who mourned Grace's loss. For more than 5,400 days, a family waited in agonizing suspense. For 15 years, a community wondered, whispered, and feared. And for all that time, a killer walked free, breathing the same Alabama air, living a life while the one he took was forever frozen in time. That all changed on a spring day, April 9th, 2025. This is the story of how a team of persistent investigators, a fresh set of eyes unburdened by the frustrations of the past, and the relentless, unyielding pursuit of truth, finally brought a stunning and long-awaited end to one of Alabama's most painful and enduring mysteries. To truly comprehend why the murder of Grace Bridges sent such a profound and lasting shockwave through Dothan, you must first understand the woman at the center of the story. Grace Bridges wasn't just another resident on a city census. She was an integral part of the city's very fabric, a cherished and familiar face known as much for her warm spirit and genuine kindness as for the furniture she sold. Born Grace Ann Bridges in 1940, she had made Dothan her home, her sanctuary, and the place where she built her life. By the age of 69, she had become the revered matriarch of a sprawling family that adored her, a mother, a grandmother, and even a great-grandmother. Welcome to Vanished Voices, where real crime unfolds in plain sight. Grace, who also went by her married name Dettert, was the proud owner of Dettert's Furniture Store located at 966 South Park Avenue. This wasn't some sprawling, impersonal superstore with fluorescent lights and slick salespeople. It was a quintessential local business, the kind of establishment that forms the backbone of a town like Dothan. It was a place where you were always greeted with a real smile, where a handshake still held the weight of a contract, and where you were treated not as a customer, but as a neighbor. And Grace was the undeniable heart of that place. In the memories of her friends and family, she was described as an amazing wife and a dedicated business partner, a compassionate and generous soul who, without a second thought, would have given someone in need anything they asked for. Dothan, a city comfortably tucked away in the southeastern corner of Alabama, proudly calls itself the peanut capital of the world. But beyond its agricultural identity, it's a city defined by a deep-rooted sense of community. In a place like that, a local business owner like Grace Bridges is elevated beyond the status of a mere proprietor. She becomes a fixture, a landmark in human form. Her store wasn't just a commercial space for selling tables and chairs. It was a hub for conversation, a nexus for human connection. People didn't just go there to browse for a new sofa. They went there to see Grace, to catch up, to share a story. Her violent, senseless, and public death wasn't just a private tragedy for her family. It felt like a direct assault on the entire town's fundamental sense of safety and security. It left an unfillable hole, not just in the lives of her loved ones, but on the very streetscape of South Park Avenue, where her presence had been a constant for so long. The question of who could commit such a brutal and heartless act against a woman so universally loved would haunt the city for years to come, a specter of doubt and fear hanging over the community. For her family, the pain was a universe unto itself, impossible to measure or articulate. As one heartfelt online tribute would later state, Grace was a good woman. She will never be forgotten, and my heart goes out to everyone who cared and loved her. But how could they ever hope to move on, to find a semblance of peace, when the person responsible was still out there, a ghost walking freely among them, perhaps even someone they knew? The store itself was a reflection of Grace, modest, welcoming, and built on trust. It was a place where value was measured not just in dollars, but in relationships. For Grace, it was her life's work. She had built it, nurtured it, and poured her own spirit into its walls. It was as much a part of her as her own name. The thought that this place, her sanctuary of community and commerce, would be desecrated and transformed into the scene of such unimaginable horror was simply unthinkable. It was a violation of the natural order of things in a town like Dothan, and yet, on a cool spring day in March of 2010, the unthinkable erupted into a brutal and horrifying reality, plunging Grace's family, her friends, and the entire city into a nightmarish ordeal that would stretch on for a decade and a half. March 17, 2010, dawned in Dothan much like any other Wednesday. The rhythms of the city were predictable: morning commutes, school bells ringing, the steady hum of daily life. But inside Deddard's furniture store on South Park Avenue, the ordinary passage of time was about to be irrevocably shattered. The day that began with familiar routines would end in unimaginable darkness. Sometime that afternoon, amid the quiet solitude of the furniture showroom, the peaceful atmosphere was annihilated by a swift, brutal, and tragically final act of violence. The silence that followed was heavy and unnatural, a stark contrast to the welcoming warmth that usually filled the space. The first indication that something was horribly, terribly wrong came at approximately 2:15 p.m. A customer, likely anticipating Grace's customary warm greeting, stepped through the door and was met not with a smile, but with an unnerving stillness. They found Grace unresponsive. The initial emergency call that went out to the Dothan Police Department wasn't for a homicide. It was a request for medical assistance. In the moment, it was a perfectly reasonable assumption. After all, Grace was 69 years old. A sudden collapse, a medical emergency. These were tragic but comprehensible possibilities. The notion of a violent crime in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon seemed too monstrous to be the first conclusion. When officers arrived at the unassuming storefront at 966 South Park Avenue, that fragile illusion was instantly and brutally shattered. They recognized immediately that this was no medical call. This was a crime scene. They found Grace Bell Bridges, a pillar of their community, on the floor of her own store. She had been shot once in the torso. Tragically, her life had already been stolen. Paramedics pronounced her dead right there, amidst the furniture she had so carefully arranged. The store was no longer just a store. It was a sealed tomb, a place of profound tragedy. Investigators swarmed the small furniture shop, their presence a jarring intrusion on the quiet neighborhood street. The flashing red and blue lights of their patrol cars cast a grim, pulsating glow on the building's facade, signaling to all that a sacred boundary had been violated. The initial working theory, born from the chaos and immediacy of the scene, was that this was a robbery gone horribly wrong. It was a narrative that made a certain grim kind of sense: a local business, a lone employee who was an older woman, the inherent vulnerability of cash transactions. The prevailing logic was that a thief, desperate for money, had been confronted or startled, and the encounter had catastrophically escalated to violence. But this theory, as logical as it seemed in those first frantic hours, would ultimately lead investigators down a long and frustrating road to absolutely nowhere. The community was left stunned, reeling from the news. In a small city like Dothan, such events feel personal to everyone. The story of the murder spread like wildfire, through phone calls and hushed conversations over backyard fences. A 69-year-old great-grandmother, a woman known for her kindness, shot and killed in her own store in broad daylight? It's the kind of crime that makes people check their locks twice, the kind that frays the very threads of trust and security that bind a small town together. The questions were on everyone's lips. Who would do this, and why? Detectives worked around the clock, fueled by coffee and a desperate urgency to find the person responsible. They tirelessly canvassed the area, knocking on every door, hoping to find someone who saw or heard something, anything, out of the ordinary. They interviewed family, friends, and anyone who might have seen Grace in her final hours. They meticulously scoured the crime scene for any shred of physical evidence: a stray fingerprint, a shell casing, a single fiber of clothing, anything that could give them a lead. In those first few days and weeks, there were glimmers of hope, promising leads that suggested an arrest was just around the corner. But one by one, each of them fizzled out, leading to dead ends. The trails went cold with an agonizing finality. The killer, it seemed, had simply vanished into thin air. Investigators tried to piece together Grace's final hours. Was there a disgruntled customer she had argued with? Was there a personal dispute simmering beneath the surface of her quiet life? Or was it, as they first suspected, a completely random and senseless act of violence? That possibility, the randomness of it all, was perhaps the most terrifying prospect for the community. The idea that such darkness could strike anyone, at any time, without reason. For Grace's family, the initial shock quickly morphed into a deep, abiding grief, a sorrow made infinitely worse by the torment of not knowing. Online forums became a place for the community to share its condolences and pain. To Grace Ann's family, please accept my deepest sympathy, one person wrote, their words a small comfort in a sea of anguish. Another captured the shared heartache. Terry and Grace family, I'm so sorry for your loss and pain. My prayers are with you all, but prayers and condolences couldn't answer the one question that haunted their every waking moment and invaded their dreams. Who did this? As the days bled into weeks, and the weeks crawled into months, the case that had begun with a furious flurry of activity began to stagnate, slowly but surely going cold. For years that stretched into a decade and then beyond, the case file for the murder of Grace Bridges sat on a shelf, a silent, static testament to a promise unfulfilled. The term cold case is used so often in television shows and news reports that it's easy to become numb to its true meaning. But the phrase fails to capture the chilling, day-to-day reality for the people left behind in its wake. For Grace's family, it meant 15 years of birthdays celebrated with a shadow of sorrow, 15 years of holidays with an empty chair at the table, 15 years of family milestones, weddings, births, graduations, all painfully marked by her absence and the crushing, ever-present weight of unanswered questions. For the Dothan Police Department, it was a constant, frustrating reminder of a debt of justice they had been unable to pay. In any homicide investigation, the first 48 hours are considered the most critical. It's the golden window when evidence is freshest, memories are sharpest, and the killer is most likely to make a mistake. When that window closes without a viable suspect, the odds of ever solving the case plummet dramatically. In Grace's murder, all the early leads had simply evaporated into the ether. No new witnesses came forward with a crucial piece of information. The evidence meticulously collected from the scene yielded no matches in the existing databases. The case became an intractable puzzle with too many missing pieces, a story with no end. But the Dothan Police Department refused to let it be forgotten. Within the department, there exists a sacred, unspoken principle: no unsolved murder is ever truly closed. It is a solemn vow made to the victims and, just as importantly, to their surviving families. So, the case of Grace Bridges remained officially open, a quiet but persistent file in the back of investigators' minds, a challenge waiting for the right person at the right time. For Grace's family, the passage of time brought no peace, no closure. It only deepened the wound. They had to learn to live with a gaping hole in the fabric of their lives, a void that could never be filled. Yet through it all, they held on to a sliver of hope for 15 long years. Their support for the Dothan Police Department never wavered, a testament to their incredible patience and faith, even as a decade passed, and then another 5 years on top of that. This is the chilling reality of a cold case. The killer is free. They go back to their life, perhaps even in the very same community, a ghost hiding in plain sight. They go to work, they see their friends. They might even have a family of their own, all while carrying the dark, corrosive secret of what they did on that March afternoon in 2010. They live under the same sky, walk the same streets, and shop in the same stores as the victim's family. Meanwhile, that family is left permanently shattered, suspended in a state of unresolved grief. But time, the very element that buries old cases under layers of dust and forgetfulness, can also, paradoxically, be an investigator's greatest ally. Over 15 years, relationships change. Alliances that once ensured silence can crumble under the weight of guilt or fear. People who were once too afraid to talk, perhaps due to their own circumstances or loyalties, might find their courage years later. And most importantly, technology evolves at a breathtaking pace. A piece of evidence that was a frustrating dead end in 2010, a smudged print, a degraded DNA sample, could, with new scientific tools and expanded databases, become the single key that unlocks everything. And somewhere within the neatly organized files of the Grace Bridges murder investigation, just such a key was waiting patiently, biding its time for a fresh set of eyes to recognize its true potential. The monumental breakthrough in 2025 didn't arrive with the drama of a Hollywood movie. There was no dramatic deathbed confession, no anonymous letter prompted by a guilty conscience that had festered for 15 years. Instead, it was the product of quiet, methodical, and painstakingly persistent police work. The journey to an arrest began not with a bang, but with a standard departmental practice, the regular systematic review of cold cases. In early 2025, more than a decade and a half after Grace Bridges was tragically killed, her case file, thick with the reports and dead ends of the past, was pulled from the archives. A new team of investigators, unburdened by the original investigation's frustrations, was assigned to review it from top to bottom. This was no cursory glance. It was a forensic deep dive into every single report, every crime scene photograph, every witness statement, and every piece of physical evidence that had been so carefully collected and preserved back in 2010. They were searching for that one thing, a stray detail, a logical inconsistency, a veiled hint, that the original, hard-working team might have missed in the heat of the moment. They were also looking for that one piece of evidence that could be seen in a completely new light through the powerful lens of 2025 technology. The investigators returned to the very beginning, meticulously working their way through the original witness list. People change immeasurably in 15 years. A teenager who might have been intimidated or scared to talk to the police in 2010 is now an adult in their early 30s, with a different perspective on life and loyalty. The detectives began the arduous process of re-interviewing these individuals, hoping that the simple passage of time had loosened someone's tongue or jogged a long-forgotten memory. In their later statements, the Dothan Police Department made a point to thank the numerous witnesses who came forward from 2010 to 2025. A clear suggestion that this patient process of re-engagement was a crucial component in building their new case. It was during this exhaustive review that the breakthrough finally happened. Police officials, protective of their ongoing investigation, have not revealed the exact nature of the one thing that ultimately cracked the case wide open. It could have been a partial fingerprint, once unidentifiable, that finally found its match in a massively expanded national database. It could have been a minuscule deoxyribonucleic acid sample, once considered too small or degraded to be of any use, that now, with modern techniques, yielded a complete genetic profile. Or, just as likely, it could have been a new clarifying statement from an old witness, a person who, for their own reasons, finally felt safe enough to share the whole truth, providing the context that finally made all the other pieces of the puzzle click into place. Whatever that pivotal piece of evidence was, it was enough. After meticulously cross-referencing all the evidence, both old and new, the investigators felt a surge of confidence. They finally had their man. This was no longer just a hunch or a promising theory. They believed they had a case strong enough to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. With their case built, they took their comprehensive findings to the Houston County District Attorney's Office and presented them to District Attorney Russ Goodman. Building a murder case on evidence that is 15 years old is an immense challenge. Memories fade, witnesses move or pass away, and evidence can be legally contested. They needed to be absolutely certain that the case was solid. The district attorney's office reviewed the evidence and concurred. The final critical step was to present their findings to a secret Houston County grand jury, a group of ordinary citizens tasked with the solemn duty of deciding if there is enough probable cause to formally charge someone with the crime. On April 9, 2025, the grand jury returned an indictment for the murder of Grace Bridges. After 5,503 days of silence, a formal charge had finally been filed. The wheels of justice, which had seemed so hopelessly stuck in the mud for so long, had finally begun to turn again. For Grace's family, it was the moment they had prayed for, the moment they had dared to hope for through 15 years of unending grief. The ghost who had haunted them for over a decade was finally about to get a name. With the grand jury indictment secured, the Dothan Police Department moved with swift and decisive action. There was no time to waste. On that very same day, April 9, 2025, officers located and arrested the suspect who had been indicted for the murder of Grace Bridges. And this is where the story, already a tragedy, took its most profoundly shocking turn. The suspect wasn't some nameless drifter who had merely passed through Dothan in 2010. He wasn't a hardened known criminal imported from another city. He was a 32-year-old man, and at the time of Grace Bridges' murder on March 17, 2010, he had been just 17 years old. This revelation sent a fresh and potent shockwave through the Dothan community. The person allegedly responsible for this brutal crime wasn't some abstract monster who had appeared out of nowhere and then vanished. He was a kid from their own town, a teenager who had apparently committed a horrific act of violence and then simply grown into a man, all while carrying the secret of that day. He had walked the same streets, breathed the same air, and lived his life for 15 years alongside the very people who were mourning Grace, all while allegedly being the one responsible for their immeasurable pain. The killer wasn't an outsider. He had been one of them. Initially, following the arrest, police withheld the suspect's name from the public. This was a procedural move dictated by Alabama's strict juvenile privacy laws. Because the crime was committed when the suspect was a minor, certain legal protections were automatically in place, even though he was now a 32-year-old adult. Alabama Code SS 1215133 is designed to keep juvenile records confidential, a policy primarily intended to give young offenders a chance at rehabilitation without the lifelong stigma of their youthful mistakes. But in a case as high-profile and severe as murder, the tension between that principle and the public's demand for answers was immense. As news of the arrest broke, media outlets began digging, and soon, through court records, they identified the suspect as 32-year-old Shonkays Tyrell Franklin. The grand jury indictment meant that he would be charged with murder and tried as an adult in the eyes of the law. The details of Franklin's life in the 15 years since Grace's murder painted a complicated and troubled picture. In a twist of fate, at the time of his arrest for the 2010 murder, he had just been released from prison only days earlier. He had been serving a 5-year sentence for a string of other unrelated charges, including obstruction of justice, theft, and various drug offenses. His adult life had been marked by a pattern of criminal behavior. He had been on the wrong side of the law for a while. But until this moment, no one had ever connected him to the brutal, cold-blooded killing at Deddard's Furniture. Dothan Police Chief William Benny released a public statement addressing the city and finally offering a measure of progress to Grace's family. "No murder case that is unsolved is ever closed," he affirmed, echoing the department's long-held ethos. "This case has remained in our hearts and files as we work to bring justice to Grace Bridges and her family." For the family, the news was an overwhelming tidal wave of emotion. After 15 years of agonizing, suspended waiting, they finally had an answer. A name. A face. Chief Benny spoke directly to their long-suffering, adding, "It is our hope that Grace Bridges' family can finally feel some semblance of peace knowing her killer has been identified and charged." The department also made a special point to thank the family for their incredible patience and their steadfast commitment to justice over all those difficult and silent years. Shonkays Tyrell Franklin was booked into the Houston County Jail, where he was held without bond. The quiet teenager who had allegedly walked away from a horrific crime scene in 2010 was now a man in his 30s, finally facing the full and formidable force of the law. The dark secret he had allegedly kept hidden for 5,503 days was, at last, out in the open. The remarkable break in the Grace Bridges case is not an isolated incident, a miraculous one-off. It's actually part of a fascinating and hopeful trend emerging across Alabama and the nation, where the powerful combination of advancing technology and dedicated, old-fashioned police work is finally bringing closure to families who have waited for decades. These cold case breakthroughs, while each unique, typically fall into one of a few distinct categories. The Grace Bridges case is a perfect and powerful example of the first category, a triumph of classic human-centric detective work. It was solved not by a miraculous DNA hit out of the blue, but by investigators with a fresh perspective who were willing to do the thankless work of going back through dusty old files, rereading every page, and patiently re-interviewing witnesses. It was a victory for shoe-leather police work, a testament to the idea that sometimes the solution is hidden in the details, waiting for a mind sharp enough to see the pattern. Contrast that with another Alabama-linked case that was solved in August of 2024, the 24-year-old murder of Julianne M.C. Donald. Her death had long been a painful mystery. She was found brutally stabbed to death in her home in Georgia just across the state line back in the year 2000. The case went cold, but investigators armed with modern forensic capabilities decided to retest evidence from the scene. Those tests, using technology that was the stuff of science fiction when the crime occurred, pointed them directly to 63-year-old Clarence George of Alabama. George had been a person of interest from the very beginning. He knew MacDonald personally, and was even found in possession of her checkbook after the murder. But authorities simply didn't have the concrete evidence required to charge him back then. It took 24 years for forensic science to finally catch up to the investigators' suspicion, providing the undeniable link they needed. Then there's the third, and perhaps most revolutionary type of breakthrough, forensic genealogy. This cutting-edge technique is what finally solved the tragic and heartbreaking Angel Baby case. In 1995, the body of a newborn girl was found abandoned in a river in Mobile County. For 29 long years, she remained unidentified, a nameless victim known only as Angel Baby. In 2022, determined investigators and genealogy experts exhumed her body. From her remains, they extracted a genetic profile and then used public genealogy databases to painstakingly build a family tree. This process, like assembling a complex puzzle backward through generations, eventually led them to a woman named Therese Purdy. In November 2024, they were able to confirm that Purdy was the baby's mother. Justice in this case, however, proved to be far more complicated. Purdy herself was a juvenile when she gave birth, and because of the specific laws in place at that time, she cannot be prosecuted for the baby's death. The case is now officially closed, bringing a name and a story to the Angel Baby, but it serves as a powerful illustration of just how complex solving these decades-old crimes can be, where legal statutes can create unexpected barriers to prosecution. Of course, for every solved case, there are countless others that remain cold, a source of perpetual pain for families still waiting. The 2003 murder of Eric Neelums in Phoenix City is one such case, but it stands as a testament to the power of a family that refuses to give up. Neelums, an Army veteran, was gunned down in his own carport in a senseless act of violence. In the nearly 2 decades since, his family has never stopped fighting for answers. They have launched petitions, funded billboard campaigns, and worked tirelessly to keep his story alive in the public consciousness, all in the desperate hope of generating that one crucial tip that could break the case open. Their struggle is a painful and important reminder that for every family that receives the call they've been waiting for, there are so many others still trapped in a state of uncertainty. Together, these very cases paint a full and nuanced picture of the current state of cold case investigations. From the dogged detectives patiently reading old files, to the incredible and ever-evolving power of DNA and genetic science, to the unwavering and inspirational spirit of families who refuse to let their loved ones be forgotten, the pursuit of justice is being fought on multiple fronts. The arrest in Grace Bridges' murder is a victory not just for her family, but for all of them, sending a powerful message that resonates through every cold case unit in the country. Time may pass, but the truth doesn't expire. The arrest of Shunke's Tyrell Franklin, 15 years after the tragic and senseless death of Grace Bridges, is about so much more than just closing a case file and stamping it solved. It stands as a powerful testament to a simple yet profound idea: justice doesn't have an expiration date. For over a decade, the brutal murder at Deddard's Furniture was a deep scar on the heart of Dothan, a painful, lingering mystery that, for a long time, seemed destined to remain unsolved forever. It was a chilling story with a missing final chapter, This breakthrough is, at its core, a story of quiet heroes. It is a story about the original investigators who in 2010 had the foresight and professionalism to meticulously collect and preserve every shred of evidence, no matter how insignificant it seemed at the time. It is a story about the 2025 cold case team, whose fresh eyes and relentless determination allowed them to see a new path forward where others had only seen a dead end. And most of all, it is the story of Grace Bridges' family, who endured 15 years of unimaginable, heart-wrenching pain with a quiet dignity and a steady, unwavering faith that this day would eventually come. The resolution of this case sends a clear, unequivocal message that reverberates far beyond the city limits of Dothan. To any person who believes they have gotten away with a terrible act, who thinks the passage of time has granted them immunity, this case is a chilling reminder that the past is never truly buried. A file in a cold case cabinet is not a tombstone, it is a sleeping giant. And with every new piece of technology that is developed, with every new detective who picks up that file with a renewed sense of purpose, that giant can awaken. For the countless other families still waiting in the shadows, still hoping for their own breakthrough, the resolution in Dothan offers a fragile but powerful beacon of hope. It is proof that even after 15 years, even after hope has worn thin, answers can be found and justice can be served. The journey for Grace's family is not entirely over. A trial will inevitably force them to relive the darkest day of their lives in excruciating detail. But an arrest marks the beginning of the final chapter. It allows the narrative to shift. It ensures that Grace Bridges will be remembered not just for the brutal way she died, but for the compassionate, kind, and beloved woman she was, a mother, a grandmother, a great-grandmother, and a cherished member of her community, whose memory has finally, after so long, been honored by the relentless and unyielding pursuit of truth. So, what do you think about how law enforcement handles cold cases? Do you believe enough resources are dedicated to solving these decades-old crimes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story compelling, please consider subscribing and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into cases where justice, against all odds, finally prevails.